getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. I'm getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Well, I'm lumped up, but I'm okay. It's gonna get lumped up anyway. You better call back the posse. Just getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the RockerMike and Rob Presents show. I'm RockerMike, Rob Rossi, top right. How you doing, Rob?
Pretty good.
Okay, and we have special guest today, author Richard Balls. He has written a book about the musician Shane MacGowan. It's called A Furious Devotion, The Life of Shane MacGowan. And we're having him on today because the book, it's been out for a bit, but it's coming out on paperback next week. That would be approximately June 14th on Amazon. And welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks.
How you doing today? Everything good in the UK?
Yeah, really good. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. I'm really excited that you're finally on. We've been planning this for a couple of months. I'll be honest with you. I'm a huge Shane MacGowan fan. I think people that know me know that. I've talked about him enough over the years. And, you know, sadly, Shane passed away in this past November. And I've totally kicked in, like, listening to the music again and everything. You know, it's been a while since I've been listening to the Pogues and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's really timeless stuff. So my first question to you.
Mike, didn't we just have that cover band? That thing will be up by tomorrow.
We recently interviewed the singer to a Pogues cover band called Dark Streets that plays in New York. And I went on a just real briefly, I tell you, I went on a booze cruise on St. Patrick's Day, and it was of the East River, just a 3-hour thing, went from 23rd Street to the Statue of Liberty and back. But this band played on the boat with about maybe 75 people on the boat. And you can imagine how that went. But they were really, really good. I mean, I see a lot of bands, but I really got blown away by them. So I kind of started talking with them. Eventually, I had the singer on. His name was Nate. Very nice guy. I'll send you the link to that when that's ready to go up. But anyway, my first question to you is why write a book about Shane MacGowan?
Well, I kind of fell on the Pogues by accident, really. I went to see, I was a huge Elvis Costello and the Attractions fan, massive fan. And when I was about 16, 17, I went to see Elvis Costello and the Attractions, which is the first time I'd ever seen them. So I was really pumped up to see them. Mm. And this was at the University of East Anglia in Norwich, which is where I live. And I walked in the venue and went to get a drink, and there was just this kind of real ramshackle bunch of people on stage. I'd no idea who they were or anything about them. There was some kind of poster up then, which I noticed said something about Red Roses for Me is out.
Yeah,
they were called the Pogues, you know. So that literally was that was the first time I'd ever heard of the Pogues. Knew nothing about them. This was in October 1984. So that they were obviously Costello was headlining, and this was a Pogues. This was their big break in a sense in the UK, or first big break, because they'd been invited to take part on this tour.
Right.
But that may have been partly because Elvis Costello was really into the bass player, who he obviously ended up
marrying. Yeah.
Marrying. So that was, you know, I became a fan then, you know, and then I saw them in London in the 80s. When they were in their kind of pomp, I suppose, really. And when I did the book about Stiff Records, maybe about 10 years ago, I interviewed obviously a whole bunch of people who were on the label. Can you imagine like how how amazing that was for me
as a fan?
All of these people, Madness, the Pogues, you know, all of these amazing acts that were on Stiff, Ian Dury, and so on. So that was just absolutely incredible for me. And one of the people I interviewed was Shane, and I met him in London. a guy called Paul Ronan, who's one of Shane's oldest friends, kind of facilitated that meeting, and Paul and I became friends after that.
Right.
So it was actually Paul that then I went to him some years later and said, "Look, I would love to write Shane's story, in the way that I would like to do it, and that in a really thorough way." I mean, there's obviously there had been books about the Pogues and Victoria's book about Shane, but they were very different from the thing that I had in mind.
Yeah.
And Paul, ran this past Shane, who kind of said, he wasn't against it. Well, I mean, that's about that's as good as it's going to get.
With Shane, probably, yeah.
That's the green light.
Yeah.
I'm not against it. So Paul then started taking me over to Ireland, and just so the two of us would just go to Ireland, and we would go to Shane's. We'd just hang out in his flat.
That was in Tipperary, Richard?
No, this is in Dublin.
Dublin, okay.
Yep. And in Ballsbridge in Dublin, and we would stay there sometimes. Sometimes we'd be in a hotel and we'd just spend a lot of time there. Sometimes we'd actually stay at Shane's. I did stay there, and the beauty of that was really that Shane didn't do interviews. I mean, you couldn't really interview Shane, not in the sense of the word that you and I would recognize.
Traditional sense, yeah.
Yeah, you don't interview Shane. He hated being interviewed anyway, and he particularly hated talking about his career and music. If you want to ask him about the hurling in Ireland or something, or politics or history, then yes, he was happy. But he always hated talking about himself and his music. He was very, very modest.
True.
So the only way really that I could do the job I wanted to do was basically not to interview him, but just to
get him drunk.
Get him drunk. I would get myself drunk, everybody in the room drunk, and just I didn't talk to him anywhere except his sitting room. That's the only place that we talked, And Shane had the television on 24/7.
Really?
Even when he went to bed or whatever time, but that's when he went to bed, because he used to just go to sleep in the chair and never went to bed at all. But sometimes he would go into a bed, but even then he'd have the television on. This was just a thing with him.
Yeah.
And so my conversations were conducted with Shane sitting in his armchair in his sitting room, watching the television, which was absolutely blaring volume. And we had to, and he would watch things like, I don't know, he was crazy into films, particularly westerns, violent films about gangsters, the mafia. That was his thing. The Deer Hunter, The Godfather. All that. He loved all that.
Bobby Goodfellas too.
Yeah, Goodfellas. Yeah, all that. I remember watching a documentary about hip hop, which I almost so many times I think I knew every single line that was about to come because I'd seen it so many times. And so these were kind of snatched bits in between, as he was watching television.
Right.
And we were all in the room, and there'd be other people there, like Joey, who's Joey Cashman, another really old friend of Shane's, and me and Paul, and it was great. I mean, it was maddening on one level because, you're trying to get information out of somebody who doesn't want to talk, who hates interviews and hates talking about his career. So it's pretty difficult for a biographer if you're facing that kind of challenge. But it was maddening because obviously a lot of the conversations and anything I could get was often in 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning, when I didn't particularly want to be still awake. So the whole thing was difficult, but also great because there was no pressure on him, and that was why I think I did manage to get in the end
right
a lot of hours and hours of recordings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's, like you say, he wasn't an easy interview, but you obviously gained his trust. Okay, you gained his, became friends, and he felt comfortable talking around you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there were other tensions. I mean, for example, his family, they were very supportive. his dad, and his sister Siobhan, incredibly supportive. And so I was talking to them, and sometimes he'd be a bit worried about maybe what they were going to say, and about it.
Sure, they know him his whole life.
Yeah.
And and sometimes but in a sense that also, because I knew that first of all that I was never it was never going to be one of those books where you just interview the subject and you don't really need anyone else, right? And also Shane had a habit, as many people in music have done over the years, of myths around Shane have grown up like weeds over the years. He was born in Ireland. He wasn't. He grew up in Ireland.
He was born in England.
He was born in England, and he didn't grow up in Ireland. He never grew up in Ireland. He used to go on visits, with his family.
Spend periods of time, but he didn't live
there.
Yeah.
He spent loads and loads of time. He didn't grow up there. He grew up in Middle England, and ended up going to one of the most exclusive schools in the country, Westminster School.
Yeah.
So you've got these, and in a sense, like I say, a lot of artists do that, and they kind of create their own narrative around their story, and there's nothing uncommon about that. But for my job was trying to untangle, the sort of myths from what actually had happened in his life. So that's why I was particularly keen to talk to as many people as I could, ex-girlfriends, family, band members, crew, as many people as I could find.
Did you get to be close with Victoria, his wife?
I wouldn't say close, but certainly, she, I did a great sort of interview with her towards the end of the research, really quite extensive interview. And she was, very cooperative, very supportive of.
Wow.
She knew that the family had authorized it and endorsed it. So in that sense, it was lovely to have his sister, his dad, his wife, and Shane, all of them cooperating and taking part and giving it its blessing, really.
Now, for many years, I've been into Shane probably since the 80s. I saw him with the Pogues here in New York when the song Fairy Tale of New York was big. So I was like maybe 87, 88. Wow. I saw him. And then I saw him once again when they reunited with him in the early 2000s. The only two times I've ever seen him. Yeah. And but I'm sort of like a self-taught rock historian type, okay? And my three, maybe you'll agree with me. My three, if I had a list of three greatest of lyricists, okay, it would be Bob Dylan,
yep,
Lou Reed,
yep,
and Shane MacGowan.
That's 100% right. That
right?
Is
I think if you just take these three men and just disassociate them with music and listen to and read the words, the lyrics, and you could do it as a spoken word thing. It doesn't matter. Okay. Yeah. I think you'd hear some of the best words ever put down on paper in
poetry,
popular culture.
I'm a little biased. I think Lou Reed was the best, but
I actually put
I
actually put Lou Reed over Dylan, and a lot of people argue with me with that. But I think the three of them, okay.
Shane and Dylan, they got nothing to be. They were great, man. They could put words like, you know what? I think Dylan's not a great singer, but he's a great lyrics. He put lyrics together because he's probably the most He's probably the most recorded star of all time. Everybody try to redo his songs all the time.
Yeah. I don't know about Lou Reed, because Lou Reed was kind of very prickly and not always a nice guy. But I know that Dylan was aware of Shane MacGowan and his lyrics.
I think one of the things that really struck me when I was doing the research around the book was some of the comments that have been made by other people. Bruce Springsteen was on the Late Late Show in Ireland.
Yes.
And he said my songs will be, forgotten. You know, in 100 years, my songs will be forgotten, but in 100 years, people will still be singing Shane's songs in 100 years.
And I agree. Okay. For Springsteen to say that was a very nice comment for sure.
And I know that Paul Simon, for example, was friendly with Shane.
Yes.
And you know, he used to visit him sometimes when he was performing in Dublin. He'd visit Shane.
Wow.
And so he has a huge respect for Shane. And when you kind of look at the site when Shane won the Inspiration Award, the Ivor Novellos, some years ago, the citation obviously talked about the influence that he had on lots of people, and you know, obviously that includes, you know, some bands over you know, your side, Dropkick Murphys,
they're good,
Flogging Molly,
right?
And obviously we've seen in more recent times, we've seen bands like, you know, Fontaine's DC, the Mary Wallopers, you know, those kind of, which got a kind of obvious kind of thing. But also the citation referred to the fact that even people like Tom Waits and Joe Strummer, whose careers had actually preceded his, were also, you know, influenced by him and great, you know, great admirers of him. Tom Waits.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You can hear it in the music. Bands like Dropkick Murphys and Flogging Molly, if it wasn't for the Pogues, they wouldn't exist.
No.
Okay. No, I mean, they definitely take a big, you know, page from them.
Yeah. Sure.
I kind of want to get a little more specific, maybe in Shane's life. It's a period of time maybe you could shed light on a little bit. After he left the Pogues and started the Popes, okay, Shane MacGowan and the Popes.
Yeah.
I felt it was kind of a back to roots kind of thing. I know that he was disenchanted with the Pogues at that point. They were kind of doing things that he didn't really want to do, sounds that he didn't feel was suitable for them.
Yeah.
There's a great documentary called, you know, Crock of Gold that came out, I guess it was about 2 years ago, I think.
That's right.
That you could stream. I know it's on Apple TV in a couple of places. He does talk about this a little bit, but maybe you could shed some light on that period, because when he left the Pogues, I remember that being like kind of a big thing. Like, what the hell is he going to do now? Okay. But then he comes out with the album, The Snake, with the Popes. And I love this record. I put it up there with anything he did with the Pogues. And, you know, he just really went back to form. Can you just shed some light on that brief period there?
Yeah, I mean, you know what? It's interesting that, you know, he didn't really take a lot of time. There wasn't this kind of period of reflection, where he kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
You know, very quickly. You know, he got, you know, he was back doing something, a brand new project, which, as you say, was definitely back to roots. It was more of a kind of rock and roll band, really. And it was based, I think, on a lot of the music that he liked himself. Creedence Clearwater, you know, some bands like that. And you know, he was doing some a few collaborations with people quite early on after the Pogues finished. So you know, What a Wonderful World cover version with Nick Cave, for example. But yeah, I was living in Dublin. I lived in Dublin for the whole of the 90s, and I was a journalist over there. And so I actually saw one of the first ever performances by Shane MacGowan and the Pogues, which was at a perhaps a slightly ill-fated festival, which never took place again. It was only ever once. The idea was it was going to be a regular thing. It was put on by the late Vince Power. He was a massive figure here. You know, did a huge amount to promote Irish acts.
Yes.
I think what happened was, you know, the lineup. If just off the top of my head, the lineup included Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, Van Morrison, Jerry Lee Lewis. You know, it's like Shane MacGowan and the Popes.
That's and
yeah, and I think probably, you know, Vince Parra probably lost his shirt on that, financially. That's what I heard. But anyway, it never happened again. But I was there and I saw Shane MacGowan and the Pogues performing at this festival. It was about 93, 94, just before The Snake came out.
Right.
And I remember that they started that set with Sally McLennan, and I know that they did a few Pogues songs, which was great for the crowd. I mean, this is like,
they want to hear that.
It was great, and you're seeing Shane, but he's playing Pogue songs, but also he did some songs from The Snake. And you're right. I mean, songs like Aisling, Snake with Eyes of Garnet, the song with no name.
Yeah. And my personal favorite, the Church of the Holy Spook.
Yeah. That's a great song.
Right. The whole album, I mean, it's so good. There's, as you say, some of the songs on that was, stand up right beside some of the stuff that the Pogues did. It's a terrific record. And, I think at that time, he had a vision for what he wanted to do, which is, the great artists have that. When John Lydon left the Pistols, you think, well, what's he going to do? And then almost immediately, you've got the Public Image Limited, that record, which is just, I was listening to that the other day, actually, and just what a visionary.
I think he's very, we're doing a podcast soon about Can, okay, the German band. And I mentioned that only because John Lydon cites them as such a huge influence. And when you listen to some Can stuff, you could see how he got to Public Image Limited, especially the early stuff. Okay.
Yes.
And nobody talks about Can anymore. You know what I mean? But they're an interesting band, very experimental and all that. But Lydon, I mean, he's talk about a visionary. I mean, and a guy that just did not give a shit what anybody thought about him. Still doesn't. Okay. I mean, if punk could be personified in one person, it would be him.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, and people like him, people like Shane, they have it's not just that they can write great songs, but they have a vision for this. Ian Dury had that as well.
Exactly.
Vision for what this is going to look like visually, what it's going to sound like, and the whole context of it. They had some, and that's what Shane had. And I think the Pogues, when that first record, you're absolutely right. The Snake, great record.
I think it's a timeless album. One other thing too that may not be as well known about Shane, but he was and I'm sure he was a gigantic like Motown fan, soul music. Okay.
Yeah.
And it shows up a little bit in the music. Okay. Like that song. Yeah. Right. That's I mean, even the video was a spoof on like, American Bandstand and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was great. I remember that. So I remember that video getting like a ton of airplay on MTV.
Oh yeah.
And at the time, I don't know, when did that come out? Maybe 86, maybe 85, somewhere around then.
Yeah.
I was just, I was in high school. I was like 16, 17 years old. And I was just like, this is great. I mean, look at this guy. Okay. He's got like no teeth and he's like singing, and, it's like, I was like, this is incredible.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. But
he was a huge Northern Soul fan.
Oh yeah.
Northern Soul as well. Yeah.
Wow.
He used to go to the Northern Soul Club in the 100 Club on Oxford Street. He used to go there, Northern Soul Nights. And he was a big fan of the Jam, obviously.
Yes.
Oh yeah, the Jam. That's a great band.
I mean, there's an interesting thing about the Jam. When the labels in this country, a lot of them were kind of caught on the back foot by punk.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And, these big labels who probably had turned down a lot of these people were like, "Oh, quick, we need to catch up. We need to catch up." What? And one of the A&R guys for Polydor, I think, knew that Shane was a bit of a scenester. He was plugged into that punk scene in London, and he went to him and said, "Look, Shane, is there anything that we can? Who should I go and see? Who can we? And Shane said, "Oh yeah, there's a band supporting someone next week at the Marquee or something. Go and check them out. They, see." And that was the jam. So actually,
Wow.
Shane played a pivotal role in the jam getting signed.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Wow.
I mean, you see him if you've ever seen the punk rock movie. Shane is this such classic images of him with the Union Jack and dancing around and all that. And I remember when I first saw that, I was like, "Who is that guy?" You know what I mean? I was like, amazing. But you mentioned earlier, a few minutes ago, about Nick Cave. I know that
Nick Cave.
He was very close with him.
Yeah.
But another person that he collaborated with was Sinead O'Connor. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
And they were very good friends as well, right?
Yeah. They were very good friends. Obviously, there was a sort of controversial element to that. I mean, I interviewed Sinead for the book. It was a phone call, but it was a pretty lengthy one. And, I spoke to her really about, not about his music and all that. But it was about her friendship with him and her thoughts about him. And, I mean, when Shane was living in London and she went around there one day, this is like, the early 90s.
Yes.
And, she found him taking heroin.
Yes.
And she went around to Kentish Town police station in North London.
Rattled
him out. Yeah. She told them, she shocked him into the police and said he's taken heroin. But obviously this was purely for his own benefit. This is a friend trying to help him.
He didn't take too kindly to that, I'm sure.
Well, no, and lots of people at the time didn't, and and you can kind of understand that. But that was a very interesting thing, because if he had, for example, ended up with some kind of any kind of drug conviction, in the end he ended up with a caution, because one of his ex-girlfriends, who's then become a solicitor, accompanied him, and some of the police were for Pogues fans, so that helps. That was all good, but it was a wake up call. I think it was what she hoped would be a wake up call,
right?
And it was done obviously with the very best intentions, and obviously years later it was kind of all forgotten about, and they were good friends. But Sinead was very, as you would expect, very blunt, very open, and when she talked to me about Shane, and particularly about the fact that he hadn't recorded anything for such a long time and hadn't produced anything. So we talked about that as well.
Yeah.
It was fascinating to talk to her. I mean, they were admirers of each other's music, and that Haunted track is
that duet. Yeah, it's
beautiful. It's beautiful.
I think it is. And just a little tidbit. Maybe you have an answer for this. Do you remember the movie Sid and Nancy?
Yeah.
Remember how that song is featured in there, but it's different?
Yep.
What was the reason for that? How come Shane is not used on that? His vocals.
I literally can't remember. I don't know the answer to that.
I've always wondered that.
It's really good.
They credit it to the Pogues. They credit it to the Pogues, but it's not the same singers.
No, it's not. Because it was released as a single over here.
Yeah.
With Shane on it. No, I don't know the answer to that. It's a really good question.
That might be like some copyrights or studio stuff, and they say, "All right, you can use the song, but you can't use the original." It could be something that simple.
I just wonder if Shane objected to it for some reason, and they went ahead with a different singer.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. It's a great film. I mean, Gary Oldman. Brilliant.
It's totally fiction, but it's a great film.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's terrific. Yeah, and obviously Shane was a huge fan of the Pistols, and he saw them, and of course that was a sort of Damascene moment for him when he saw the Pistols.
Yeah, I remember in the film, the documentary, the Crock of Gold documentary, that he felt that when punk happened, that was his world. He could fit into that.
Yeah. I think what was really interesting again was that when you look at his life and the context of when that happened, he had been in a sort of psychiatric hospital
Yes.
For many months, actually. His family became so worried about him. He was at home taking a lot of drugs, and it was having, you know, a huge effect on him mentally. And they kind of said, "Look, do you want some help?" And he said, "Yeah."
Wow.
So he actually, this was when he was like 17. So he was admitted to Bethlehem Hospital in London, known as Bedlam. So this is like early 70s, you know, you can imagine, or mid 70s.
Not a good time. It's still like a, you know.
I heard he was so bad. In order for him to get treated, they had to give him a small dosage of drugs. Is that true?
Mate, I don't know, but I mean, you know, this was a different time. You know, we hear this expression used for a lot of things now. That was a different time in the treatment of this. I think there were people getting ECT, you know, electric shock treatment.
Yes.
Shane always said he didn't, you know, and I asked Victoria about that, and she said no, you know, he didn't. But he certainly he could have witnessed people, you know, getting electric shock treatment. It would have been a very, very harsh, kind of brutal environment. He spent his 18th birthday on the ward of this place.
Wow.
And it was only a few months after he came out, or very, very shortly after he walked out of there. And he was basically like doing a bit of laboring in London. He was totally like drifting, no purpose, didn't know what was happening. He was still obviously getting over the fact that he'd been in this hospital for so long. And I think one of the first things, if not the first thing that he saw music-wise after that was the 101ers, Joe Strummer's
band. Yeah.
Wow.
Supported by the Pistols.
Yeah, I mean the 101ers, for people that don't know, was the band that Joe Strummer was in before the Clash.
Yeah,
and it was really kind of like what they call pub rock, which was you know, like a brief period in England. Bands like Dr. Feelgood and you know, what's that other band? Eddie and the Hot Rods.
Yeah.
And it was a cool period, you know, and I could see how punk kind of just evolved out of that very quickly.
Well, I think actually what happened that night, it really was that also Shane was obviously like looked up at the stage and he saw this, you know, this guy with, you know, reddish hair. He's got terrible teeth.
Yeah.
his parents are also. He's also second generation Irish.
Yeah.
He's got this mad attitude. You can see why Shane is like locked onto this.
Of course.
But also Strummer and company were listening to the support, thinking, we're gone. Like we've got to, you know, stop this, and we've got to move on, because you know that was probably about 75, 76, and you know they realized right there and then that you know that they'd been completely superseded by this, and they you know 101ers couldn't just carry on doing the kind of pub rock that, you know, style of stuff.
Yeah. Now, after punk kind of fizzled out a little bit, like late 70s, he had a band called the Nips for a little while, which was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
But you know, I think he got kind of sick of the scene, looked for something new, and you know, looked back at his Irish heritage, and you know, came up with this. I mean, at the time, it was totally off the wall, really, mixing rock and roll and traditional Irish music. It had never been done, never been thought of, as far as I've ever heard. Okay,
it was brilliant.
It was absolutely brilliant.
It was brilliant.
Okay, and it probably could have only happened because of Shane. All right, because he was an Irish guy growing up in England and dealing with that dynamic, which as Americans we don't quite understand all that. Okay, I have an Irish background. Okay, but I was born here. Okay, I'm a mix. I'm Irish and Italian, so I have that background. But in England, you know, for many years, and I imagine it's probably still there to some degree, is the Irish were treated second class, and you know, you were kicked around for being Irish, call you Paddy or whatever. Okay, and he had this, you know, he was very proud of it. Okay, And I've read like in Victoria's book, I think he goes into it a little bit about with the Pistols, and he had that in common with Lydon because Lydon has that background and all that. Anyway, I mean, it probably only could have happened in England. That type of thing, that type of music wouldn't have originated in Ireland itself.
No, I think that's a really, really good point, and I think this is lost on a lot of people. A lot of people do assume. I mean, when I was interviewing one of the Pogues for the book, I think it was Daryl Hunt. He would say that they'd go on tour, and people would meet them afterwards in Germany or somewhere, and they'd say, "Oh, we thought you were all from Ireland."
Yeah.
Like, I mean, when the Pogues actually started, there wasn't a single person in the Pogues who was born in Ireland. Not one. Nobody. Including Shane, obviously. And so the point is that it was Shane's lyrics and songs and everything, as you said, about the Pogues was done through the kind of prism of looking back at Ireland from England, from that place of the diaspora, the Irish diaspora, and everything that they were going through in England with the sort of discrimination. And a lot of Irish people maybe felt quite cowed about being publicly proud of who they were, because obviously the IRA were carrying out bombing campaigns.
The IRA was bombing people constantly.
So yes, you're absolutely right. I don't think the Pogues, if Shane had grown up in Dublin or Tipperary or anywhere in Ireland, the Pogues wouldn't have happened, because the lyrics. If you look at all those lyrics. Especially from the first couple of records, it's all about, a lot of it is about London.
Yeah.
He's not singing all the time about Tipperary and Dublin. He wasn't writing songs about people who were leaving Ireland in the 80s, for example. That wasn't what fired Shane. What fired Shane was like old Ireland, and that was one of the things I really found, but by sitting with him and getting to know him a little bit, was that those kind of old Irish values. Respecting older people, the local sports and people's connections with the Republican movement and just everything. It was all Irish old values. That was really where he was coming from. That was what fired him, really, and that wouldn't have happened if he'd been brought up in Ireland.
And also, he faced resistance in Ireland too. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
What they were doing. I mean, the impression I get is that Ireland itself was kind of coming out of. I mean, the Second World War was 35 years before, but they still were kind of modernizing as a nation. They were coming together. They were dealing with the problem with the British and the IRA and all that they were dealing with as a nation. And the last thing they needed is some drunken Irish guy from the other side of the of the sea. Okay. Falling down and singing about this kind of stuff. So do you think like they really kind of, in Ireland, it took them a little longer to catch on? Because they caught off pretty quickly.
If you look at there's a great clip, I'm sure it's on YouTube. Gay Byrne, who presented the Late Late Show in Ireland. The Pogues went on there in about 85, I think it was, and he questions Shane. He comes to the microphone, questions Shane after they've performed, and is really a bit hostile. He's kind of saying. You're just sort of like playing up the drunken Paddy, and and you're absolutely right. Ireland in that time, about 1985, there was still quite a lot of people leaving the country. Then they were trying to put a modern face out. This is a modernizing Ireland. We're trying to sort of shed that kind of image of drunken. The drunken Irish, they were just, the Dubliners obviously were obviously like that as well. That was another band obviously that influenced Shane heavily, but they just wanted to shed that kind of image completely. And so the Pogues coming over, especially in a way because they were coming over from London. You know, they're not even from. They're not even from here. You know, they're just coming over from London. And they're just playing up the kind of image that we're trying to forget.
Right.
And so there was suspicion. And maybe when they did the song with the Dubliners, then
that helped.
The Irish Rover, and maybe that actually helped a bit.
Yeah, and the Dubliners were loved so.
Hey, Richard, let me ask you a question. Did he have like a favorite football club?
Yeah, Norwich City.
Oh, I thought that was your favorite football club.
That is my team. That's my team.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you now about the funeral for Shane.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you told me you went. It was held in the beginning of December in Dublin, in Ireland.
The funeral was held in Tipperary.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Tipperary. Excuse me. And I know that the whole city shut down for him. Basically, the president of Ireland was there, as well as many celebrities. One person he was very close with was Johnny Depp over the years.
Out there.
Johnny spoke at the funeral, and so I know you were there. What was that experience like?
Well, it was like a state funeral.
Yeah.
In all but name.
Yeah.
As you said, you've got Michael D. Higgins, the president of Ireland, Jerry Adams,
IRA,
a former Sinn Féin president, and and then you have these people, a lot of musicians taking part, which is like a kind of who's who of Irish, musicians, people like Sharon Shannon, obviously members of the Pogues, Cronin, they're just Finbar Fury. There was just an extraordinary array of people. Nick Cave performed Rainy Night in Soho at the piano.
Yes.
It was a very, it was streamed pretty much around the world. BBC iPlayer had the whole funeral.
Well, the horse and carriage was beautiful.
Yeah. So there was, as you say, Dublin. You had a lovely parade through the streets of Dublin, and I was kind of sitting there thinking, who else? What other Irish artist would have a funeral like this, and the kind of reaction that there was in the wake of Shane's death? I can't really think of anybody, because obviously lots of other big people like Bob Geldof and Bono and people like that. Of course, huge names, huge influence, but they didn't do Irish music. No. The thing with Shane and the Pogues is that they just go to the very marrow of what it is to be Irish.
Yeah.
And the Irish experience.
Yes.
And
which if I could just interrupt for a second, in America, it's kind of lost. All right. The Irish experience, there's some movies like Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York, for instance. I'm sure Shane was a fan of that film.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. That shows how the Irish were treated here when they first came.
Oh, yeah.
But I think over the decades, they've assimilated so well into American society that it's kind of forgotten what the experience was. Okay.
Yeah.
And the Irish did something that in America, they did something that I'm not an expert. I'm not sure if it was really done the same way in other places, but what they did is they really kind of immersed themselves into the authority power of America. For example, like politics and law enforcement. Okay.
Please, yeah.
The stereotypical Irish cop in Manhattan somewhere.
Oh, in Manhattan. You remember what they used to call the truck, right? The paddy wagon.
Paddy wagon. Yeah.
Irish cops.
Sometimes you still hear that. Yeah. The paddy wagon's coming, and they're going to come and scoop you up off the street. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's so now like as a society, what they did, at least in America, is they said, okay, well, if you're going to treat us like crap, we're going to turn it around and we're gonna try to run things.
Yeah.
Okay, and they did that, and they were very successful at that for many years, and all that. The discrimination they received here is lost, and in a way that's good. But you should never forget that stuff either. But in England, I don't think that really happened as much, right?
No. Yeah, you're right. I mean, definitely. One of the things I think about, so 1984, when I saw the Pogues at the university in Norwich, that tour, while that tour was happening, the Brighton bombing took place.
Wow.
And obviously an attack that was obviously aimed at trying to take out the cabinet, Margaret Thatcher's cabinet.
Yeah.
And so the Pogues getting up on stage and singing what some of the songs they were doing were basically rebel songs.
Yeah, absolutely.
At a time when
in England,
at a time when there were so many bombs going off, and there was a lot of fear, and also a lot of discrimination. So what the Pogues did was extraordinary, in that way. And I think Shane and the Pogues really tapped into that Irish experience, that lived experience. That's the difference, I think, between them and all the other Irish acts. Really, this goes to the absolute DNA of Ireland, and that's why I think Shane, as well as being just an incredibly gifted writer,
right,
and sort of iconoclast, I think really that's why you had that massive outpouring of grief, when he died.
It was kind of similar, but obviously this was way bigger scale. It was kind of similar as when Johnny Thunders passed away. Okay.
Yep.
I was a big Thunders fan, and I knew people that knew him and all that. And, he was expected to die for 20 years before that. Okay. Yeah. And then when it finally did happen, okay, it still shocked everybody. And it's similar with Shane. People have been writing him off for 25 years and, saying, oh, he's not going to last. And he did. And when it happened, I was like, wow. I mean, I followed him on Instagram, and I knew that he wasn't doing well because Victoria had posted some pictures of him in the hospital and all that. But you thought he was going to, pull through.
And the thing about Shane as well is that he did not want to die.
Of course not.
I mean, you can hear. I mean, we talk about self-destructive. A lot of his behaviors and his lifestyle was self-destructive and all the rest of it. But Shane, at no point, as I'm aware, did Shane ever want to die. And in fact, right till the very end, he was trying to live. In no way had he given up. As some people may do. And so in that sense, I think that there is a sadness in me about that. That although he died at 65, which is relatively young, it's still a life cut short. Yes. I did feel sad at the funeral because, as you say, even though people have been expecting it or predicting it for about 30 years, when it happens, it's still a shock.
Yeah.
Because this guy, he'd been a real larger than life figure. And actually, what's interesting as well is whereas a lot of acts, a lot of artists who have been out of the limelight for as long as him, I mean, he actually hadn't. The last original material that he'd released was The Crock of Gold, the Pope's second album, which came out in 1997.
Yeah.
That's you're talking 25 years. More. But for all that, it didn't feel like he'd sort of like disappeared. Like a lot of acts, they kind of disappear. Never heard of again. But actually, Shane was always in the press for some reason. Victoria, to be fair, was responsible in a way for keeping him front of mind for a lot of us. And that was great, and then you had things like I say, the Ivor Novello Awards. You had his 60th birthday where he was, at the National Concert Hall in Ireland, where he was given, this kind of special status, by the National Concert Hall. like a lifetime achievement award. And for him, you know, I know Siobhan and his sister and other people said to me he was more proud of that than anything, because it was Ireland. It was being recognised in Ireland.
Right, right. And another thing I think he's recognized for probably more in recent years is the lyrics, you know, and the words that he spoke in these songs. And I think he thought himself more as a writer than a musician. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Shane was no great musician. I mean, you know, in the early days of the Pogues, he played guitar. If you look at a lot of those early clips, Shane's, you know, he's rocking about and he's playing his guitar, and he loved doing that kind of rhythm guitar. But eventually, you know, that was taken over by somebody else in the band. But I mean, yeah, he didn't see himself as a musician for sure. And in a way didn't really see himself as a front man either. I mean, he wasn't, you know, Shane was not somebody to push himself forward at all. You know, he was quite modest. You know, I mean, obviously, I mean, he was an amazing front man, you know, absolutely.
One of the best I've ever seen.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But, you know, yeah, and you know, he's happy to do that, but you know, he didn't see himself as a musician or as a performer. I think you know, his greatest asset was his writing, and one of the things that I was able to do in the book was speak to his ex-English teacher, who I managed to track down, who was about 90 when I got interviewed him.
Wow.
And you know, he has since passed away, but when I went to see him, he had these school books of Shane's that he had kept. Now, this guy had never kept any other books by anybody else. No other pupil. He just kept these. Some of them were just little bits of paper, little essays, little things that Shane had written in his English class. And he had these exercise books, which I then eventually returned to Victoria. So they're in safekeeping. So these we still, you know, we still have these amazing. And what I was able to do when I read these, some of these were written when he was like 8 or 9. And what became apparent was that this kind of innate ability that he had to kind of tap into what people were saying. You know, he'd go on his little holidays over to Ireland to his family, and he'd listen in on what was being said to the neighbors, or he'd overhear someone gossiping about something. And, you know, this is what he did. You know, this is what the great writers do. They're like a sponge. They soak up everything that they hear around them. And so it was very, very clear that he had this great writing ability at a very young age. And his reading list, like he'd come back in the summer and the English teacher would say to the kids, what have you been reading over the summer? And, you know, the kids probably, you know, if they were reading anything, it'd probably be magazines or some books meant for kids of their age. Right. Shane had been reading like Dostoevsky, you know, D.H. Lawrence. Yeah. You know,
no, and that's where he's similar to me to Lou Reed. Okay, Lou Reed had this, you know, this idea, you know, again, a great artist with a vision. Okay, to take hard-boiled street stories in the vein of Dashiell Hammett or Mickey Spillane type stuff. Okay, hard-boiled. William Burroughs, Naked Lunch, or Hubert Selby, Last Exit to Brooklyn, that kind of stuff, and put it into like a simple rock and roll song, okay? And nobody had done that before, okay? But for Lou, and I think it's the same with Shane, is it was always about the lyrics.
Yeah, always.
You know, the music was a vehicle for the lyrics, and it was always simple, okay? It was, you know, I mean, not that it's easy to play the Pogues and stuff like it's not, okay? But as far as like a vehicle for his lyrics, it was simple.
I think that's one of the great things. I think that's again one of the reasons why he's so why his songs will be listened to in 100 years' time. To quote Bruce Springsteen, is because we can all relate to this stuff. You know, it's about all his songs are about the human condition. It wasn't just about the Irish lived experience. It was about the human condition. It was about, street people like, the old main drag.
Yeah.
On Rum Sodomy and the Lash. So this is about real life, real people, real situations. Fairy Tale of New York, obviously. It's not a sort of.
It's considered a Christmas song, but it's like it's
really
not
a Christmas song. Yeah, it is.
And it's like the most. It's not a sort of bauble on Pop's Christmas tree. Yeah. This is a song effectively about emigration.
Yeah.
And again about that that experience of Irish people coming to America, and these kind of, in some cases, unfulfilled dreams, what they think it's going to be like, and then what actually unfolds in their life, and it's that is just an extraordinary song. It's just an incredible thing. I don't think there is another song that you could compare to Fairy Tale of New York in that sense. It's the most unlikely Christmas song probably ever.
It is. That's true. It has the sound of a Christmas song, but listening to the words, it's totally not.
It's brilliant, and it's literary, and it's about like I say, that kind of human condition, and that was what Shane was about. He was a humanitarian.
Excuse me. You know what I wanted to ask is about the funeral.
Yeah.
Okay. What was very prominent, and you couldn't help noticing, is that he was in a wicker casket. And just was wondering if you had any insight on the reason for that, as opposed to, was that something he wanted in
that I don't know.
Yeah. I've never seen that before, to be honest with you. So I
have no insight into that. I mean, I don't think it would have been something necessarily that he would have necessarily wished for, because, like I say, I don't think that those kind of conversations took place.
Yeah. I mean, it was a beautiful thing to see.
It was.
But it was very unique, and I thought maybe there was some kind of reason behind it.
No.
Okay.
Can't help with that.
Okay. So, about your book, now it's called A Furious Devotion, The Life of Shane MacGowan. We'll wrap it up here, but I just want to ask you, what's the Furious Devotion?
Well, I think really, you can read whatever, take whatever you want from that. I mean, I think for Shane, the Furious Devotion was definitely about Ireland. His furious devotion to his country, to its past, to its history.
Right.
That was, went very, very deep for Shane, and a furious devotion to life. His attitude. Again, people could say, well, it's self-destructive, but actually, he lived life to the full.
Yes, he did.
He lived, every moment as if it was his last. And so I took that lyric obviously from. I really struggled for quite a long time as to what I was going to call the book, and like you do, you come up with lots of different ideas, but then in that song, Mother McCroy, I just saw that line, a furious devotion, and that just felt apt on so many levels, really. But I think really, I think he was so devoted to Ireland, absolutely, and that's why that Lifetime Achievement Award that was given out by the National Concert Hall would have meant so much to him.
Sure. All right, Richard Balls, thank you for coming on the RockerMike and Rob Presents show. We wish you all the best with this paperback version of the book. Okay.
Yeah.
Real quick though, is there anything different between the hardcover and the paperback? Is there any additional chapters, anything like that?
Yeah, okay. For sure. So
updated a little bit.
Yeah. So the book was updated after Shane's passing. So the funeral that we've been talking about, and that parade through Dublin, and the journey down to Nina, which is where Shane spent a lot of times. Great town, really great town in North Tipperary, which is where the funeral took place. just an extraordinary event. And so the last chapter takes in the events, the last few years of his life, his passing, that funeral service, and the wake as well afterwards, but also just that kind of legacy. What Shane means to music.
Wow.
And to Ireland.
It's a great story. I could tell everybody they need to read this book.
Yeah.
Listen to the music. Listen to the words and what he had to say.
Listen to the music, yeah. Listen to the Snake as well. Listen to the Pogues, listen to the Pogues, and just absolutely immerse yourself in these just wonderful songs.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Richard. And like I said, we wish you all the best, and stay in touch. And
I will do.
What do we say at the end of every show, Rob?
We don't get drunk.
We get lumped up.
We see you next time.
All right. Take care.
All right. My pleasure.
All right.
I'm getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. I'm getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Well, I'm lumped up, but I'm okay. It's gonna get lumped up anyway. You better call back the posse. Just getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi.